The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show, Friday bonus show, last show of the week, last bonus show of the week, and things got a little hectic in studio today, so it's just me today. Pat is, we'll call it on assignment, but we can also call it putting out fires, or we can call it dealing with unexpected emergencies. You call it whichever you want. If you've been watching the show for a while, you know these things happen every once in a while. We're continuing to think about what the future of the U.S.-Saudi relationship should be, and thinking about ways for people who care about this, actually holding the Saudi regime accountable. And Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said over the weekend that the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia cannot move forward until Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is, quote, dealt with, although Lindsey Graham wasn't more specific. Now, that's super interesting to me because I agree we need to deal with Mohammed bin Salman, but what exactly does Lindsey Graham have in mind? He said, quote, let me find the second part of the quote. Or actually, I don't have the second part of the quote. That's what I would have liked to have heard from him. And of course, the context of this is understood to be the Jamal Khashoggi killing, the way in which Saudi Arabia has, number one, not really faced any consequences for their role in that, but number two, has really managed it as a PR event, the likes of which we would expect from Saudi Arabia to attempt, but we wouldn't necessarily expect to so successfully happen. And Jamal Khashoggi, of course, was that prominent Saudi journalist. He was a U.S. resident. He was writing op-eds for the Washington Post, and he ended up being killed at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. Now it's been December, November. It's been getting close to 4 months. I mean, it's amazing how quickly time is flying by, but it's been 3 to 4 months at this point. And despite the sort of initial narratives around why Khashoggi was on the radar of people, we've since learned that actually he became sort of an annoyance not only to the Saudis, but also to the Trump administration shortly after Trump's election, when he started writing critically about how a Trump presidency would impact relations with Iran and some other geopolitical issues. So for me, of course, we don't know what Lindsey Graham has in mind, and anyone in the U.S. Senate, Democrat or Republican, who's willing to say we need to deal with Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi regime, my ears immediately perk up, and I'm right there, and I want to hear exactly what it is that they're talking about. But what I think is important to sort of think back to here is that the Khashoggi story is, if you imagine a Venn diagram that involves the Trump administration's war on media, the immoral relationship with this just brutal dictatorial Saudi regime, connections to our relationship with Turkey and President Erdogan. There's all of these other stories that are sort of touched by the Khashoggi killing. And none of the explanations that we've gotten make sense other than this was exactly what it appears to be, which is just a brutal targeted killing. We don't have any serious reason to think. I know that there are more Democrats that call for this than Republicans, but there's no serious reason to think that there's going to be a significant change to our relationship with Saudi Arabia, which the show's been around more than 10 years, and I've been talking about this issue almost as long. I've been aware of this since I was, in my late teens. What exactly is this relationship we have with Saudi Arabia, and why is it that they are sort of exempt from the same types of criticism that so many, particularly on the right, correctly apply to other countries in the region? So we'll see if anything comes of this, and I'm certainly going to keep talking about it. We have news from Pope Francis in the Catholic Church, and I always am unsure how much our audience cares about what's going on in the Catholic Church. I mean, I know that, so objectively speaking, the Catholic Church is influential in that there's 1.3-ish billion Catholics in the world, and the Pope is influential with some significant portion of those 1.3 billion Catholics, although arguably less so over time. But increasingly, we are seeing declarations from the current Pope that seem It's still the Pope of the Catholic Church, but they seem a little bit more grounded in certain realities, the reality of climate change, the reality of income inequality, and even a little bit of a softening on some of the social issues that the church is known to take a hardline stance on. So, in any case, the Catholic Church and the Pope have launched an app now called Click to Pray. Okay. And what this will do is it will allow Catholics anywhere in the world with a data connection or access to the internet to see what the Pope is currently praying for. And then they can join in that prayer and then click a button to say they have prayed with the Pope on that issue. And thousands of people already using the app last week as Pope Francis actually showed the app during his weekly address in St. Peter's Square. And this is, it's so funny to me because every time we report on some seeming advancement or modernization of the Catholic Church, we end up sort of the initial reaction is the Catholic Church has done X. Isn't that incredible? Wow, this is a real modernization of what's going on in the Catholic Church. And then we immediately hear some kind of retrograde statement from Pope Francis. And then we end up saying, oh, right, it's still the Catholic Church. And it's not exactly going to be a bastion of progressivism that we might hope it to be. But I think that in the net, is the Catholic Church ever going to be a truly progressive organization? I would be shocked. I feel like the Catholic Church will sort of evaporate before it becomes an actually progressive organization. I don't have any reason to think that it will ever be that. But its influence has been waning. More and more Catholics, and there are many in our audience who write to me and tell me this, many more Catholics sort of believe in the idea of the Pope, but tell me they don't really care what the Pope says in terms of how they live their lives, and that it's more sort of like for some people, I mean, I couldn't say this as someone who's not a Christian, but some Christians in our audience will write to me and they'll say, I still consider myself Christian. I still am sort of a follower of the idea of Jesus Christ, but I don't really care or feel guided by the specifics of what's in the gospel, for example. And I think that that applies to the Catholic Church, maybe even more so, which has a smaller sort of fundamentalist component by percentage than Protestant Christianity, with all of the evangelical and Pentecostal and other more extreme movements. So to the Catholics in the audience, do you care at this point what the Pope says? And do you care at all about the fact that the Pope now has an app that you can use to signal that you've prayed with the Pope? We talk about different diets on the bonus show every once in a while, and I end up often coming back to the same conclusion, which is not everything in moderation is fine. That's not exactly what I subscribe to, but more that what everything seems to point to is that diets that limit red meat and have a moderate amount of poultry, but really focus animal protein on fish and have a lot of unprocessed foods, olive oil, legumes and nuts, etc., sort of the Mediterranean diet, as it is often called, or variations of it. That seems to be really the healthiest option. There's an international team of scientists which has developed a diet which they say can improve health outcomes, but also ensure the sustainability of food production in the context of mitigating climate change and environmental damage. They call it the planetary health diet. And what it's based on is cutting red meat and cutting sugar in half and increasing intake of fruits, vegetables, and nuts. They estimate that this could prevent more than 11 million premature deaths without harming the planet. This has been published in the medical journal, The Lancet. What's interesting to me is that this is basically just another name for the Mediterranean diet. In other words, what we're learning is that whether you call it the Mediterranean diet, or you call it the planetary health diet, or you call it the climate change mitigation diet, or whatever, what seems to be generally a good practice is we limit red meat consumption pretty significantly. And I do this. I probably have red meat, I don't know, maybe 5 times a year or something like that. Usually when I go to Las Vegas for that conference, Sam Cedar and a few different people will get some nice steaks in Vegas. And there's a restaurant in Amherst, Massachusetts, which has a really great beef noodle soup. But otherwise, I'm really not eating red meat almost at all. Poultry consumption is better than red meat consumption. And I'm probably on poultry roughly once every 7 to 10 days or something like that. My girlfriend's pescatarian, so when we cook at home, I'm basically only having fish, seafood, and vegetarian meals. And then beyond that, I am on, as I said, a mostly pescatarian diet, using olive oil, using legumes and nuts and all of this stuff. So call it what you will. It seems that this is a diet that is good for human health. It's a better diet for the environment. And from a lot of angles, this seems to be reinforced. One other note on this, I will get emails from people who recommend much more extreme diet changes. And it's certainly possible that there could be a diet, and I'm totally open to it, that is better for the environment than this so-called Mediterranean planetary lifestyle, planetary health diet. What I think is important when we talk about diet is the most important element of it is that it's sustainable, because just because you can find a diet that's better for the environment that people might stick with for a month, if it's not sustainable in the long term, it's not really an effective so-called diet or lifestyle. So I think that's something that's important. When we think about the ideal diet, part of it has to be, is this a diet that's going to work for people based on their lifestyles? Because if not, drastically changing one's diet is not something that's likely to lead to significant success. All right, that's it for the bonus show today. We'll be back with a whole new slate of shows and bonus shows next week, Monday to Friday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.